Good evening. Thank you for coming out. We're very excited for tonight's talk. My name is Thomas Donnelly. I'm president of ASMP New York. For those who do not know, that is American Society of Media Photographers. A couple words about ASMP, and then I want to introduce Thomas Werner, who's going to be moderating tonight, and then he's going to introduce Chris. Chris Buck, that is. So first of all, I just want to say, for those who do not know, ASMP is one of the oldest and largest trade organizations of its kind in the country. Our New York chapter is one of 39 chapters throughout the country. We were founded on advocacy and advocating the rights of photographers nearly 75 years ago. In a couple of years, we're going to be celebrating our 75th anniversary. We have a regular presence on Capitol Hill, where currently a key focus has been the creation of a copyright small claims court to make the power of the legal system available to the working photographer. ASMP is all about raising the bar for the business of photography through education, peer groups, exposure to industry decision makers, and the like. We have a lot of different events going on. Next week, for example, we have, if there's any students in the house, if you know any students of photography, recent graduates, we have a student portfolio review with a lot of really top decision makers, and that's open and free to the public. One year we had a busload come down from Boston, so it's really open. Find out about it. We have information at the table and back. It's really an amazing opportunity. Some of the other upcoming events we have are negotiating and pricing with Judy Herman on May 18th. It's going to be a terrific evening. We have something on July 25th on contracts. We are reviewing and updating the ASMP boilerplate contract, and we're going to have a brand new one for those who come out to the evening. It's going to be great. And then, of course, we have great networking parties, including our summer one in July. In addition, we have many, many benefits, discounts, and pro and student insurance packages, and things like that. You can also find out to be a volunteer, or even figure out if you want to join the board of directors and get involved in creating events like tonight. One thing that, I just lost my place. I want to thank the entire board of directors of ASMP New York. Everyone's been fantastic. I particularly want to point out Peter Murphy, who has been the lead producer on the ASMP side of this event. Thank you, Peter. And of course, Thomas Werner, our brilliant collaborator and connection to Parsons School and the new school here. And he actually happens to be my predecessor as ASMP president a few years ago. Thomas is also serving as tonight's moderator. And he's no lightweight. Here's just a taste from his biography. Thomas is the author of the upcoming book, The Fashion Image, for Bloomsbury Press, London, which is coming out in January of 2018. He's an editor-at-large of Irk magazine, a Paris-based fashion and culture magazine and website. He's an assistant professor and past photography program director at Parsons School of Design in New York. Thomas currently lectures internationally on topics of photography, fashion, education, and contemporary professional practices. He is also the former owner of Thomas Werner Gallery in Manhattan's Chelsea Art District, and recently for the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations, UNESCO. Let that sink in. He led a team developing a media and literacy website and resource center in 5 languages: Spanish, French, Russian, Arabic, and English. Werner has worked with the Department of State as a cultural representative in Russia and is a recurrent instructor at the United Nations Education First Summer School. His personal work has him spend an average of 70 days a year in Russia and the Ukraine, working with cultural to governmental organizations, developing projects in 34 cities. He gets around, and the list goes on. Please welcome Thomas Werner.
Hi. Thank you all for being here. It's a great crowd. First, I'd like to thank Parsons School of Design and the New School University for giving us the space this evening. It's an extraordinary space. I'd like to thank our AV audiovisual folks up there who've done an amazing job helping getting us up to speed, and the facilities folks in the space who've also helped bring this together. So thanks to Tom Donnelly and to Peter. We've been talking a lot, and to Chris as well. These things always end up taking a lot more time and a lot more email than you'd ever imagine. It's my pleasure tonight to be the moderator for a conversation with Chris Buck. Chris was born in Toronto. His father worked for Kodak, so he was kind of born into the industry. He went into the family business and became a photographer. He moved to New York in 1990 and established himself as a sought-after editorial and advertising photographer. His clients include Google, SAP, Old Spice, Dodge, GQ, The New Yorker, and The Guardian Weekend. Chris has won multiple awards, including being the first recipient of the Arnold Newman Award in 2007. His first book, Presence, The Invisible Portrait, 2012, is a collection of celebrity photos in which famous sitters are present but not visible. Kathy Ryan, photo director of the New York Times Magazine, called it a crazy subversive book. His 30-year retrospective, UNEASY, which we'll be discussing this evening, is set for release in February this year. It was just recently released, so you all get the first taste. His other series of work includes Chris Buck's Chris Buck, where he does portraits of other people with the name Chris Buck. That's so Chris. Gentleman's Club, where he does portraits of exotic dancers' boyfriends, and Likeness, pictures of 10-inch 3D photographs of himself. Uneasy, the book that you're seeing tonight, is a group of portraits of famous people taken from 1986 to 2016. For 3 decades, Chris has been carving out a unique space in the world of celebrity portraiture, capturing its ineffability, its danger, its oddness, and its warped sense of reality. So please help me welcome to the stage Chris Buck.
Well, I'm honored to be here. This is fantastic. I first want to thank ASMP for bringing me here and helping bring a great audience. And of course to Parsons, the new school, and especially Thomas Werner, who brought me in specifically, and I really appreciate that. All right, so let's get on to the slides. Let's see if I can get this to work. Yay, okay. So I'm going to be, of course, talking about Uneasy and my celebrity portrait work for the most part, but I want to mention other things I do too. I shoot regular, real people, because celebrities aren't real, we know that. On the left is from my Chris Buck series, and on the right is from Gentleman's Club, the portraits of exotic dancers, husbands and boyfriends. If you know of any, just talk to me after the show. I'm still shooting it. I'm not joking. This is from my series of people on their all fours. This is from Presence. This is a picture of David Lynch. This is from Likeness, a series with the 10-inch figurine. And I do lots of advertising. And here's the obligatory cute picture of my daughter slapping an advertising creative. So really what I want to talk about tonight is about damage. My personal damage and the damage I see in my photo subjects. That is, the great and celebrated famous people. Really, my entire career is all about me seeing my reflected damage in the people who I photograph. I guess it's kind of my obsession. I didn't really know it at the beginning, but over time that became sort of my thing. The picture of Joaquin Phoenix, which is the cover of the book, is from 1995, and then Lena Dunham is from 2014. So you see a consistent line of people bending a little forward. In my archives, I managed to find a picture of me at the CN Tower denoting Toronto. And as Thomas mentioned, I grew up in a photography family, going to the Kodak Christmas parties. So as a young man, as a teenager, I was obsessed with popular culture. It was, I guess, really, I wasn't really accepted or really noticed by my peers, so I kind of stepped into the outer, larger world of popular culture, and that became where my head existed for a long time. So then, as I got older and I had to find something to do with myself, I had some affinity for photography, largely from my upbringing, and some artistic talent. So I went to work photographing the famous, particularly musicians early on. So I'd go to concerts and shoot live as Echo and the Bunnymen on the left, and Iggy Pop at an autograph signing on the right. So my initial portfolio was mostly built from those kind of pictures. I started to do some more real sittings, but I was too afraid to photograph people's faces, so my first series was of rock stars' footwear. This is Greg Ginn from Black Flag, arguably the most important guitarist of the 1980s, and I photographed his foot. John Cale, this is actually the first picture in UNEASY from January of 1986. He gave me 5 frames, and he counted them off as I shot. This is frame number 3. So I've gone to a lot of photo lectures and talks myself, and I always hate the way everyone always shows really cool pictures, even back to the early ones. So I thought it was important to show some really failed shoots. The Nick Cave shoot is possibly the most difficult shoot I've ever done, where he literally made fun of me after every frame. And Sonic Youth on the right, I was obsessed with Sonic Youth. They're my favorite band, and they were, and I underexposed all the film by about 2 stops. And only through the magic of Photoshop was I able to eke out this sort of interesting diptych. Also, the Sonic Youth shoot was a very important turning point, or dealing with them in general, because they were so awful to me that this is how I learned how to not care about the subject and to only care about the picture. It's a piece of advice I give to young photographers all the time, is that really the best portrait photographers really don't care what their subject thinks or wants, and they make the best picture they think for themselves and their audience. And after Sonic Youth made it very clear to me that I was not a cool person, I focused on only making the pictures and not on trying to befriend the subject. So after I graduated college, I went to Ryerson in Toronto. After I graduated, I came to New York. I actually came on a social trip, but I brought a portfolio with me, which I'd made in college. I visited Interview and Esquire. This is actually my second note from Esquire. You can see that I stayed in touch as per her form letter request, and I got a second form letter, this time with a handwritten note. And amazingly, I took a picture of myself in the Vanity Fair lobby. So when I got back to Toronto, I talked to my 4th-year professor and my mentor, Dave Heath, and I told him about my experience in New York. I got great responses, people were really positive, and he said, you should really move to New York. And I said, I think maybe I could build some momentum here in Toronto and then take that to New York. And he said, that won't work. You have to go, if you do that, you'll just start in the bottom anyways, and you might as well go when you're young. So I didn't take his advice exactly, but I did put it in my mind and began to prepare. Here's a couple of shoots I did in Toronto around that time. This is Anton Corbijn and Keanu Reeves. There's me and Keanu. He thought I was cool. William S. Burroughs. On the right side, you can see an early attempt at my making notes before a shoot. I got a little better organized later. For this shoot, people often ask me how I got my early shoots, and a lot of them, like the shoot with Anton and the shoot with Keanu, actually both were ones where I just kind of made it happen myself. With Anton, actually it's kind of a funny story. Tom Waits was coming to town, and so I called the record company. I said, I heard Tom Waits is playing tonight. Can I get a few minutes with him for a photo shoot? And the woman said, well, Anton Corbijn can't even get to him. I said, Anton Corbijn's in town? Oh, forget Tom Waits. I want to meet Anton. So my friend and I basically staked out the box office, and when Anton came by, we cornered him and said, we have to photograph you and interview you. So that's what we did. With the William Burroughs shoot, I actually pulled together 2 clients and got them to both come on board to help me to get the access to him. So around this time, I was told by a colleague that I need to shoot medium format to be considered professional, and so I bought one, but it actually took me about 4 years to figure out how to work the thing properly. You can see even in this picture, it's actually out of my reach. So around this time, I'd be shooting portraits, and even though I was still shooting 35 millimeter, I would crop them to a square to try to start to think in a square. This actually was about a 5-minute photo shoot. I did 2 setups. This is one of them. You can see that he kind of did something hammy for me and laughed about it, and I asked him to do it again, but to do it more serious. And you can see frame 13 is the one that I ended up using. So I did move to New York, and this is my apartment in Brooklyn, where I did lots of self-portraits that were really pretentious. Spalding Gray, Curly Schleeman, and Chuck D. With the Curly Schleeman shoot, I met up with her at our house in New Paltz, and she, I don't usually ask people like for much help, but I did ask, is there anything interesting around? She said, well, my neighbor, they have like a swimming pond. And so I said, oh, let's go shoot there. So we went over, and as we approached the pond, she took off all her clothing and stepped in. So I took off all my clothing, and I followed her in, but with a camera. Richard Linklater at Houston and Broadway, you'll recognize. Billy Corrigan for Guitar World magazine. So I had a few clients at this point, but they're really pretty modest. Village Voice, Guitar World, places like that. I really wasn't making much money, but one of my important decisions I'd made early on in my career that really served me well was that I lived with my parents. I lived with my parents for all through college and the first few years after college, and saved all my money and used that to move to New York. And I really spent those first few years building some foundation of what I might want to do with my photography. I still didn't really have a style yet or a sense of where I was going, but I just knew I wanted to shoot famous people and do it my own kind of personal way. Christina Ricci. So one of the suggestions I got from my mentor, Dave Heath, was to make a photo diary. So what I did for about 2 years is after every shoot, I would come back and I'd write in the diary. I'd tape in like a test print, like in this case with Sally Mann, or I would put in a Polaroid or maybe the tear sheet, because my tear sheets were so small that I could fit them in the top of the page. And I'd write down everything that went wrong on the shoot. This is not for history or nostalgia. It was to really improve. A lot of technical things, sometimes about personal interaction with the subject, but it really was a huge way to improve, what I was doing. Because, after a shoot, you just want to get home and forget what went wrong and focus on, okay, what did I get? Is there anything worthwhile here? And be positive. But I had to really step back and focus on learning. Quentin Tarantino and Mark Morris. Nothing makes a picture better than testicles. That's a free tip for you. Conan O'Brien and Morrissey. So my plan of living off the money I saved went great for a couple years, and then I lived off credit cards for about a year, and then I had no money. So I realized I need to step up and get more professional. I started to shoot more color film. And I got an agent. This was my first real agent, Julian Richards. I think kind of the trick, I didn't really realize it at the time, but the trick was that we were both starting out. And so there's a way in which joining with him at that time was really great because we grew together. He only had one photographer before me, and then the group grew and became quite successful. He was a great partner in crime. I mean, not literally, but it looks like it. And we made great promos like this one that we sent to Fortune magazine of Marissa Tomei. And so it was, and it was really a big turning point for me, just getting out there and being more visible. I started doing lots more business shoots. This is a business shoot where I actually got paid actual different line items for fee and expenses, which was like a new thing for me. I got to actually hire assistants. It was amazing. I also bought some lights and started to figure out how to use them. I'd done a little lighting before, but not much. This is a great photo for those of you who are actually photographers. You can see how crappy my lighting setup here is, and then those of you who have eyes can look at the picture on the right and see how crappy the lighting is. It took me about 12 years to figure out how to light. Some people have a knack for it. I did not. And I knew the turning point was when I was on a commercial shoot and we were trying to figure out a solution with reflections and a window and such. And I figured out the solution before my assistants did. And that's when I knew I'd arrived. Spike Jonze and John Woo, two great directors. So around the time I turned 30, I had a kind of an existential crisis. I think it was just really hard to turn 30. I think that part of it was I kind of felt like I'd been riding on being kind of good for my age and well achieved for my age. And at 30, I could no longer do that. And I really was at a point in my career where I wasn't getting the kind of work I wanted or expected. I expected to be at a certain success level at that point, and I wasn't hitting that mark. And my clients didn't think I was, and I didn't think I was, and it was very upsetting for me and very challenging. I also got testicular cancer at the time, which really upset me less than turning 30. Here's my pictures my dad took of me when I got my testicular cancer removed. And I was like, why'd you take pictures? And he's like, because you handed me the camera and said, take pictures. And since he worked for Kodak, he had to. So I was kind of obsessed with Irving Penn, and I wanted to be the Irving Penn of my time. And I knew I wasn't, and I wasn't anywhere close to getting there. And it was very upsetting, and it was a very difficult time for me, and it was a lot of struggle. I mean, if I thought I could have done anything else, I probably would have left the business and done something else. I mean, I thought, well, maybe I could be a teacher, but like then I'll just be like a bitter, angry teacher, and no one wants that. And so here's me worshiping at Irving Penn's door. So I kind of went through this struggle for a number of months and was very depressed about it, and eventually just had to move on. And I think I just sort of settled in my mind, like, well, I'll just have the career I have. I'll make a few good pictures. Maybe a couple will be important and notable, but I won't have the career I want or had hoped for, but I'll just have to have the career I have, and that'll be okay. And so I carried on with my life, and looking back, 15, 20 years later, it's only looking back that I realized it was then that my style and my vision really came together. I think there's something about that struggle of thinking through all that stuff that made it really, that kind of moved me into a new space and allowed me to kind of become the photographer I was meant to be. This is Julia Child and Elvis Costello. Chris Farley. So the Chris Farley shoot was a really important one for me in that, when I shot him, the magazine wanted pictures like this, and this kind of goofy and fun and, kind of like Chris's persona. It was fine to do it and everything. But I learned from my experience early on where I wasn't really pushing hard to get commercial work or whatever, that I should always carve out some time for me on a shoot, even if it's just 10 minutes squeezed in. So I did this setup with him, maybe did 2 rolls. But, when I got the film back, I thought, this is just really pretentious. It's me putting my darkness and my weirdness onto Chris, who's just like this really sweet, goofy guy. And then after he died, and I read about what he'd gone through in his last days and his last months and how tortured he was, I'd actually been away, and I came back and I went through the contact sheet and I found this frame of him, and I was just like, wow, like this is both beautiful and poetic, but also so speaking to where he was at. And it's sort of one of my lessons in learning to trust my kind of messed up instincts. Johnny Depp and Ewan McGregor. Martin Amis and David O. Russell. The Fugees. George McGovern and Willie Nelson. There's a great story about the George McGovern picture. Chris Rock and Ariana Huffington. Connie Britton and John Cusack. So I love this picture because it captures the exact moment when I began to panic and lose it. I was sent to Scotland to photograph Dolly the sheep. It was like literally the day after the cloning had been announced and all the data about it. And it was amazing and insane. And I was shooting her in front of this blue backdrop, and I was trying to get her to stand in this kind of like, sort of the sanitary shot of like the sheep in front of the seamless, just staying there. But every time the handler would kind of bring her in, she'd just sort of walk out of the frame. And there's something about that moment on set with things going wrong that in a way, all synapses are firing. And I figured out to put a flash on the camera and just get up in her face in the shoot. And it worked out amazingly. In fact, the crazy thing is, I was shot in Scotland, so I flew to London and I ran a clip test in a lab in London. It was Chrome E6. But then I realized I had to run to go get my flight. So I took the film and the clip and jumped on a plane back to New York and ran the film in New York based on the clip in London, and it ran perfect. A random picture of me with the Spice Girls. Gary Oldman. So I love this shot of Gary Oldman. I think it's really cool. I'm really proud of it. But it was actually inspired by a newspaper photograph in Maine. And the picture in Maine is so much better. Because this kid's so sinister looking, and he has that like awesome rat tail too. Philip Seymour Hoffman. The Upright Citizens Brigade. Car headlights. New York mayors. So I shot Jay-Z for the cover of Blaze, and it was actually their idea to shoot him in his neighborhood where he grew up at the Marcy Projects. And then, this was in 1998, then jump forward to like last year, and this guy tags me, Robbed Blind tags me, and gives me credit. But the best part is it only has 35 likes. George W. Bush. So I photographed George W. Bush before he became president, and it was this magazine cover. So this ended up sitting in my portfolio for a number of years, usually as a tear sheet. And this photograph, it illustrates best what I call the empty vessel theory, which is that people will put into a photograph what they want, that they instill whatever they bring to it is like half the story of the picture. So in different points of his presidency, people interpreted this picture differently. So early on, people saw it as like a man who's confident and knows himself. And then after 9/11, it communicated like a sense of strength for the country and unity. And then after things were going bad in Iraq, people talked about him looking dumb or weak. And it was just amazing to me to see the narrative shift over time. Now mostly people say stuff like, he wasn't so bad. Lisa Kudrow and Wayne LaPierre, back together again. The guys from Mr. Show, Bob Odenkirk and David Cross. So my background wasn't super technical. It was never really the area I was that interested in photography initially, but occasionally I come up with a clever idea, and if I could find a way to execute it relatively simply, I would do it. And I was inspired by this scene in the movie Royal Wedding with Fred Astaire, where he dances on the walls and the ceiling, and I want to try that with a photo shoot. So with the guys from Mr. Show, I hung the seamless on the two walls instead of the wall and the floor, and then kind of cheated the lighting a little bit. And it worked out great, and the shot's really cool, but David Cross really never forgive me because his head's against a concrete wall. Malcolm Gladwell and Casey Affleck. James Caan and Mary Tyler Moore. So with James Caan, he was so James Caan, like he was amazing. He was so funny, and there's like a stream of consciousness constantly about things he was annoyed by. And at the end of the shoot, I said, can I get a picture of you punching me in the face? And he's like, no. And I said, can I then do a picture of me punching you in the face? And he's like, I'll punch you. This is a picture of me with Alfred Hitchcock's picture that I just threw in here just to remind me to mention how much I love Alfred Hitchcock and how I'm inspired by how he tries to put his weird, dark things as a subtext in all his pictures. And that's what I try to do too, which I'm not implying I'm as good as Alfred Hitchcock, just that I'm inspired by his putting all his messed up troubles in his work. And I apologize to that poor lady who's standing in the picture. This picture is self-explanatory. Bjork, Jim Carrey. So by the mid-aughts, I was basically known as the guy who photographed comedians because apparently my pictures were funny. I never intended to make funny pictures. I think maybe because I wasn't athletic, no one would talk to me unless I was a little funny or something. So I think I developed a sense of humor in school, and so I'd have some friends. And at some point, I couldn't resist putting it in my work. But I love shooting with comedians, and we usually kind of get along great because the magazines usually want quote-unquote funny pictures, but I want like weird, messed up pictures, and they usually are happy to join me. I did not take these two photos, just to be clear. I don't do homages very often, but when I do, I really love it. It's super fun. And, getting the right balance, of course, is really the challenge, but it's a fun thing to do. Oh, here's some Polaroids I found the other day. Billy Joel, Leonard Cohen, and Tina Fey. Leonard Cohen made lunch for me and my assistant. It was like best shoot ever. I had a pastrami on rye with a side of chicken liver. Billy Bob Thornton. So Billy Bob Thornton shoot is one of my favorite shoots to talk about in the sense that people often talk about the importance of connecting with your subjects on a portrait shoot. And I think it's generally very true, but with Billy Bob, I just basically read off a list of ideas to him before the shoot, as we were beginning, and he said yes to some and no to others. And then we just shot, and then between shots, he'd just sit and read the paper. And the amazing thing is he said no to something. Here's a contact sheet to prove we actually had him urinate. So that idea actually came from a shoot I'd done a couple years before, where I was out shooting this business executive in a field in Texas, and we had this seamless up, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool if he peed in the backdrop and it would change the color and be so beautiful? And I realized it wouldn't be like a good fit for this subject, but I made note of it and use it with Billy Bob. And it's something that I've kind of learned to do, is to keep notes of things that maybe ideas I have for a shoot. I keep those notes and potentially apply them to a future shoot. Dave Pennebaker and Chloe Savigny. Paul Frank. People often ask me, and my assistants, they'll ask them, how does Chris get people to do things? The simple answer is, I just ask. Now, that's true, but there's also, I look at this picture and it makes me realize how in the 2 hours from the first moment I met him until we did this picture, everything I did was leading up to when I said, crawl on your knees, pushing your mascot through the suburbs, that he just would say yes and not question me. And it's a mixture of being nice and being kind of manipulative and kind of a bully. It's a kind of an unholy mix of those things. Heavy metal icons turned reality TV icons. William Shatner. This idea actually came from a shoot I did with the Strokes, where I was going to have them in the studio and then have the guy at the end being arrested by a New York cop. And I didn't end up doing that with them, so I saved it and did it with Shatner. Martin Short and William F. Buckley Jr. I was super excited to be photographing with Buckley. When I was younger, I was much more into music and movies, and as I've gotten older, I'm more interested in politics. So as I was shooting with him, this was in 2004, so I was asking about the Iraq War and his take on neoconservatives and all this stuff. And at some point, he looked at me and said, "Are you done with the pictures then?" And I said no, and I just looked down and I kept shooting pictures. And then after, I asked him if I could take pictures of around his house, and he said yes, this is his liquor cabinet. So I was with Julian Richards as my agent for 15 years, and we became very close. And at a certain point, we were actually very close friends. And but then at some point, we weren't close, and it kind of got weird and awkward that he was my main business collaborator, and we were no longer close. And it was kind of a bromance gone wrong. And in the end, I kind of felt like it was maybe a bit of an unrequited love, and I had to move on and move on with my life. And it was a very good relationship, and actually I dedicated Uneasy to him. I think he's almost like the perfect representation of, a kind of, available but somewhat inaccessible person who is important in my life. Here is my lonely picture of him on a mountain. Elliot Erwitt, David Cronenberg, Donald Trump. So speaking of pictures that people have different takes on at different periods, I photographed Trump for Philadelphia Magazine. The story was about how Trump is everywhere or something. And we had myself and my wife's friends all wore these masks around him. And this is my second time shooting with him. So the first time he was fine, he was polite, but the second time he was having a small audience, he just came alive and loved it and was joking, and I was joking, and they were laughing at his jokes and my jokes. It was great. And then at the end, I pulled out a print from the previous shoot, and I said, I brought this for you as a gift. And he opened the envelope, and he took it out, and it was kind of a strange picture, but he looked at it and said, "What's this for?" I said, "I want to buy another setup with you." And he said, "Sure." And that's how I got this shot. Seth Rogen and Paul Rudd. This is the notebook from that shoot, and you can see it's far neater than the William Burroughs one. Usually what I'll do, this is actually the handwritten notes I wrote early on. I think I probably did about 6 pages of notes like this, where I'd write down things that I might want to do, and then I put little check marks beside the ones I'm going to get more serious about. And then I translate it into the notebook for on set, so it's more tidy for me and for appearances. There's some pretty good ideas in here I still haven't used yet. Naked on Western Street, that's a good one. Shaving legs together, I mean, come on. This is gold. Tony Curtis. So when I was going to go photograph Tony Curtis, I mentioned it to my mother-in-law, and she said, "We know him as Bernard Schwartz." And so I went to a Hollywood store where they have old 8x10s and bought this 8x10 of him, and I gave it to him and asked him if he'd sign it for my mother-in-law. So this is what he wrote. So this is a perfect segue into mentioning my wife, who, especially through the process of doing this book, has been so amazing and so supportive and so patient with me being so distracted and doing the book. It's funny, I've been doing this work and doing this project for so long. In a weird way, people ask me, like, how does it feel with the book out and done? And it really does feel like a whole part of my life has been given to me that I haven't had for decades, and I'm really looking forward to spending a lot of it with my wife and daughter. Perfect segue into high-fiving a cat. Bryan Cranston and John Hamm with Nas. So, the way I do my shoots is often so much about the selection, the edit, and this is the one frame where Nas looked uneasy enough for me to feel okay about it. And of course, appropriately, he's doing that lean forward thing. Jim Parsons and Michelle Bachman. So the Michelle Bachman shoot became my best known picture overnight. And the crazy thing about it is that the shoot itself was really intense and really confrontational. I actually did an interview with the blog A Photo Editor, which was released yesterday about the shoot, which I'd never really talked about before, and talked about how difficult it was because she was directly challenging me about what we were going to do and what kind of shots we were going to make. And it was really one of the most, since Nick Cave, one of the most intense shoots of my career. The comedians really enjoyed it too. This is some mock covers from Funny or Die. Oh, there's Nick Cave again, coming back. When I did this shoot with him, he came in, this is my third time shooting him, and he came in and with a grand wave of his arm, he said, I heard we shot together before and it didn't go that well. This one will go much better. And he was right. Steve Coogan, Simon Cowell, Barack Obama. So when I shot with Obama, we had to arrange with the White House what the shots would be. We basically mapped out 3 shots. One was going to be just a tight face portrait. The second was going to be a classic 3/4, looking away. And then the third was me pulled back, and that's this shot. And of course, the flags don't match, which is so annoying to me. It's like was the main picture run in the magazine. Anyways, so the whole shoot was less than 4.5 minutes, and we shot a little bit, and then the handlers were like, all right, let's move on to the next shot. So I had him with a classic 3/4 looking away. I said, sir, hold your head position, but look with your eyes at the camera. And he looked at me and said, I don't do that. And I snapped the picture. And this is it. Here we are working. Oh, here's the notes. I was so nervous about the shoot, I couldn't write his name at the top of the page. And you can see in the bottom left, that's where I usually write notes for what to talk about. So I was going to talk about the fact that we both have daughters, and I want to talk specifically about the map room because I knew we were shooting in the map room. So I always have little kind of cues of things to talk about to keep it, to help work the energy, but also to keep it from being super awkward. The girls from Broad City, Nick Offerman and ASAP Rocky. So this is getting to be pretty recent now, and I have to say, even now I'm still learning new lessons. The ASAP Rocky shoot was a lesson in don't bring your child to a shoot. So I was already set to babysit her, and then the shoot came up kind of last minute, and we had someone to come to take care of her, but they weren't coming until a little later. So I picked her up and I brought her to the location. And then the babysitter came, and the babysitter was so excited because he wanted to meet A$AP Rocky. I'm like, fine, stay. So my daughter did a drawing of the shoot. And A$AP, so when she was done, she brought it in, and A$AP wanted to see it, and he really liked it. So he asked if he could have it. And so this is her giving it to him. And he said he was going to use it for his next record's album art. And we haven't heard from him yet. I don't know if Olive will give permission. This is Kendrick Lamar. He's so cool. It was worth meeting him just to get a picture of my figurine being respected by him. Lena Dunham. Benedict Cumberbatch and Paul Giamatti. Here's on location with Paul. So as around this time, I was beginning to get things together to finish the book, and Paul's one of the last pictures in the book. And so I did a Kickstarter to support the book and help the printing of it. So one of my little conceits I did was to go to a number of sites where we did shoots and have me stand in for the photo subject. So here's me doing the Kickstarter for, pretending to be Paul Giamatti. I developed a few, over the years, I've been trying to do this book for over 10 years. The cover option with Billy Bob was from about 2005. And then I did an early mock-up looking to get a publisher about 2 years ago, and that's this cover. I had this mock-up for a while, so I'd send it to publishers, but I also would bring it to shoots sometimes. And here's one of the subjects looking at the book. He's looking at the picture of himself. I tried to show him other parts of the book, but he didn't seem very interested. And there's an early mock-up of the cover, and then some match prints. And here's the finished book. We'll be selling them after the talk. I've been doing some events. This is a gallery opening. I have a wide span of fans. And this is the ending picture. My grandfather. Thank you so much.
What keeps you focused and dedicated and driven for your span of your career, particularly when things are tough?
Well, I think in a weird way, when things are tough is the most inspiring. Like, I've sort of learned that I often get my best ideas when I'm struggling. And once I kind of figured that out, whenever I'd have, look, God knows I'm not looking for hard times, but when I have them, I really try to tap into it. And if I have ideas, I write them all down. I have hundreds of ideas, most of which are not very good, but occasionally good ones come to the fore and I do them. And I make them a new project or just, or a single picture or whatever. But certainly the struggle is part of it. I think another part of it is I feel like my best work is ahead of me and I'm working hard to do better. I feel like my goal is that the work I'll be remembered for has not been made yet.
So conceptualizing and photographing your way through those moments?
More conceptualizing. I think when I'm shooting, I'm happier because I'm in the zone. It's more when I'm not getting the assignments I want, or I had a trouble where I had a breakup with an agent and he had stolen a bunch of my money. I'm not going to mention his name, but most of you know who he is. And it wasn't Julian Richards. So that was a really super hard time. But I came up with a lot of ideas and actually was very fueled by that, and it became very positive. And now I'm making a lot of money for my new agent.
That's very nice of you. We saw her come up in that gorgeous car. No. So is that where trusting your instincts comes in, both in terms of conceptualizing your career and also on set?
I don't know, trusting your instincts. I'm a commercial photographer, so for my first job is always to fulfill the client's needs, whether it be editorial or commercial. That's always front of mind. But I also have to feed that other side, and I think it's important for one's career, but it's also just who I am. And in a way, I think in my commercial work, I've generally been very lucky. Maybe people who don't know the business that well will see my commercial work and say, "Oh, was this your idea?" And I'll say, "Well, no, it was really like an advertising agency and a team of very creative people working very hard, and that was their awesome idea, but I helped them finish it off." But the fact that they even might get confused that it looks like my work shows that, I'm able to apply my vision even to other people's ideas. So I think that I've been very lucky in that the clients I work for generally want me to do what I do, and at least some portion of me is in there. And so I've always been able to tap into some part of that along the way.
How do you think somebody builds a career that they get to the point where they're hired to do what they do?
I think that you have to do what you do from day one. You don't, I don't think there's a pivot point. I think you do what you do, and let me put it this way. At the point where I talk about where I'm learning the lighting and I'm trying to do more color and things like that, I was doing all that stuff, and I was executing the kind of shots I thought my clients wanted or ones they explicitly said they wanted. But the ones that went in my portfolio were still always what I thought were the best. The way I thought of it was my tear sheets are where I've been, and my print portfolio is where I'm going. And I think, in terms of my website, it's a similar thing too. There's a way in which you have to strike that balance of kind of not leading your client, but showing them what might be possible if you're brought on board.
If they trust you.
And so I think that you always have to present your portfolio as your best self. And, I know there's always commercial concessions, especially depending, like New York, we're very blessed, is such a cosmopolitan market. You can do a fairly narrow thing and do well. In more regional markets, it's more challenging, but there's still ways to do it, to have pockets of your website to speak more to your personal vision and other parts that are more speaking to what clients' immediate needs might be.
That makes sense. So if you have an editorial team on set or you have an advertising team and you have PR people who are with a celebrity, how do you break through? It's one thing to get the celebrity to say yes. How do you break through that clutter to get some of the images that you get?
Well, I very much, well, certainly the client is my first, I think my method is often that, you saw my notes for the Seth Rogen, Paul Rudd shoot. My first thing I do is I do these full scap, things. So I'll research people or read interviews with them or watch their films or whatever they do. And then I'll write up pages and pages of notes. And those ideas are very free-flowing, and most of them are unshootable because they're too perverted or violent. But then I call down to ones that might be usable, and I'll float some of them in front of my client. And then the ones that they want, they'll float those in front of the publicist. And that's really the kind of methodology. I always hold back some ideas from the client and the subject until we're on set. If I can realistically make an argument that I thought of it on the way over, I will keep it close to my chest and only bring it out on set. Funny things happen, like that Steve Coogan shoot, that weird shot of him wearing a fur coat on fire. I gave them like a bunch of ideas, and they presented the safest ones to the publicist. The publicist said no to all three, so they sent the other three, which were the weird ones, and so we had to do those. So it was great.
It's amazing.
You just never know. I think on set, it is a little dance. With the subject, the publicist, and the client. I've kind of learned to treat the publicist as a second client. I really loop them in early on. I tell them what's going on. I don't necessarily tell them everything, but I tell them the main gist of what's going to happen in the next half hour, 45 minutes, so they're in the loop. If I can get them at least feeling like they're looped in, they tend to relax a little bit and let things happen. They still say no, and that's fine. It's funny, someone the other day asked me, what do you do when a subject says no? I'm like, why go on to the next idea of the dozen ideas I brought? They say no to things all the time.
Right. And you said research, and I think a lot of young image makers don't understand the importance of research. A lot of your images look like they were just spur-of-the-moment events, but they're based on research that you've done on these people that are...
Absolutely. Relevant. A great example is that Simon Cowell picture. So he's got this little bunny on him. I was reading about him, I think it was actually just on his Wikipedia page, it said how he had supported an animal rights event. And I was like, wow, you don't think of cute animals and Simon Cowell being in the same space together. So I thought, well, if we could do something like that, that'd be great. This was for GQ, and GQ loved it. So they pitched that to him, among other ideas. And all the publicist wrote back was, no props, only simple portrait. And the magazine had the faith that we could pull it off. So they hired like an animal wrangler, and we had a dozen bunnies of all different sizes and colors, and he could not resist.
That's great. And there have been a lot of changes in the business, as you can speak to, your rep can speak to, from the film days to digital to now social media and others. How has the shift in business affected the way that you approach your work, or how we're able to do this?
I don't know. Obviously, my viewpoint is very subjective. I feel very blessed for the things that have happened that are good, and I try to maximize the struggles for good ideas. So I try to make everything work. I don't know. The shift to digital was rough. It took me a few years to kind of figure out how to do it. My solution, just if anyone cares, was I shot the DSLR cameras for a while, and it felt like a step backwards. It felt like shooting 35 again. And so shooting to the medium format digital was the ticket, and now that's all I shoot. I also shoot 360 cameras, but that's another story. It's part of it is, for me, the technological aspect with different social media or different kinds of cameras and stuff. Now that I am technically strong and I've got that strong foundation with lighting and cameras and all that, I actually find that stuff really exciting and really fun. I find those challenges are some of my favorite shoots now, because in a way that a lot of the foundational stuff is so easy. I like the challenge of something being difficult technically and trying to crack it and then make an interesting image on top of that. I mean, the social media landscape and stuff, I mean, it just is, I don't know, it is what it is. I try to find the balance between not pandering and still communicating with my clients. I mean, initially I was very publicly against Instagram because I felt like, you know, it's not really a place for professional photographers because it's where everyone else is. But then my agent told me that all my clients were there and they're kind of curious if I might be too. And so now I'm lovingly on Instagram multiple times a week.
That's great. And you shoot medium, which I never would have guessed, to be honest, just because of the fluidity of your shoots. And you have a rather large team then?
It varies. I mean, for the personal shoots, it's like my intern with a laptop, and my, you know, advertising shoots with like 30 people. So it totally varies, and I love that. I love that flexibility. It's, you know, it is one of those things that comes with experience. That and it's funny too, because you were asking about how times are changing, maybe budgets are different and stuff. In a way, coming out of editorial and working with both editorial and commercial, I don't know. I never really had like I talk to older photographers who are like, oh, you know, the 80s was so great, the budgets and the cocaine and then, you know, I've never had cocaine in my set. Like, it's just, I don't know, maybe I'm just hiring the wrong producers, but.
That's right, wrong producers.
But
wrong
I
clients.
feel like that kind of flexibility, I really feel is an asset. And if just a challenging year or two, then it's not so different than it was, you know, in the early 90s or whatever. It's fine, you know, and it's so much, in a way too, like when you've done it long enough, you've had really uptime, like you've had uptimes and downtimes, and you learn, you survive the downtimes. As long as you're making work and keeping your vision and you're eating, then it's great and times will be good again.
And true, you're ahead of many people in our industry when that happens, right?
I don't know. I mean, look, I mean, everyone, I think experience is good. And I think, you know, I do feel lucky that I have a bulk of experience that makes me a safer bet maybe than a younger shooter. But I don't know, in a way, like I also have more overhead than they do. So I have to meet more. So I think that there's advantages to being young and older. I mean, I don't like when people talk negative about the current, I mean, you weren't saying that necessarily, but
not at all.
people will often talk very negative about the current environment regarding amount of work or budgets or whatever. I don't know. I'm a positive person, and I like to see opportunity rather than, you know, we don't know what the future is.
No, and quite frankly, I think a lot of the students we work with here move very fluidly from video to still, online to print. They don't see the kind of divisions that maybe you or I grew up with in the industry that
Totally.
were much more rigid, which is a
Absolutely.
beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, they're lucky. So, truly, and I think there are a lot of opportunities that didn't exist when there were just a handful of outlets.
Yes.
But what would you give advice-wise to some of the students in the audience who are starting out and trying to figure out, how do I access a celebrity, or how do I build, you know, myself as an image maker? How do I move into this?
Well, I mean, I mentioned earlier that I live with my parents. Keeping your overhead low gives you flexibility. You can make more of the images you want. I think one of the key things I see with young people is a lack of clarity as to what they want to do, where they want to be. I mean, my standard question I ask my interns as they're leaving is, like, where do you want to be in 5 years? And most of them don't have an answer. And it's a tough question, but I mean, I guess maybe I know I was lucky when I was young. I knew what I wanted to shoot. I just wanted to shoot famous people. That's all I wanted to do. And, you know, frankly, my peers thought I was kind of shallow, and maybe I am, but that's what I wanted to do, and I was unapologetic about it. And so I think that clarity of, you know, the first pictures in my book were taken in like my second year of college. And it's because I already knew what I wanted to do. I think that that's a big thing. I think if you want to shoot celebrities, they're a lot more accessible than you think. There's lots of different kinds of celebrities. I think if you want it, you'll figure out a way to do it. You know, most of my early portfolio was not really made on assignment. It was made through me finding the celebrities and getting whatever, 5 to 10 minutes with them and just doing what I can with it.
And what made you trust yourself to that extent when you were a young image maker? Were you obsessive?
I was totally obsessive, totally ambitious, mean, when my friends were like drinking and doing drugs and having sex, I was taking pictures and making a portfolio. Not a very exciting 20s, but I got a lot of work done. It was, I was very focused and very much about, I mean, I had friends and I was social, but I really was about making my work and moving myself forward. Moving to New York was a big thing. I mean, you guys already are here, but or even moving away from where you grew up, I think is really good for you. I was very focused, and I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
How did you learn to deal with a 5 or 10 minute shoot with a celebrity or a president? Or...
Sure. Well, early on, certainly it was about available light. That shoot with Dennis Hopper, that was like 5 minutes for 2 setups. We did one by the window. That shot was just a hotel room, and the window's behind me, and then behind him is like the room, and it just happened to be clean enough behind where he was. And then the second shot we did in the bathroom with the bathroom lights. And because it was black and white, it was relatively easy to make it work. Most of my shoots are not that short anymore. Usually I get a couple hours, but certainly prep time is huge. I mean, the last shoot I did, I can't say what it is because it's not out yet, but I asked for 3 hours ahead and they only gave me an hour. And the shoot was like, it was chaotic in a way I don't like because I was constantly doing catch up and, I didn't have the kind of flow with the subject that I like to have. So prep time is huge. I mean, I used to arrive like an hour before the shoot, and then I was like, maybe I'll, and I still felt myself rushed. Then I'd come an hour and a half. And I think a lot of that stuff is, when you're dealing with making portraits, so much of it is about your relationship with the subject and creating a sense of that little bubble in which you're going to work. When I give assignments to my interns, they'd come back and they'd have pictures that they kind of open with excuses, and I'd be like, well, why are you making excuses? So, well, I only had 20 minutes, and well, why was it only 20? Well, they're getting ready for work. I'm like, you planned a photo shoot for when someone needs to get off to work? Like, what is this? So I really try to say to them, like, ask for the amount of time you need. Ask for 3 times as much time as you think you deserve, and that's probably about the amount of time you need. I'll ask for 10 minutes. Maybe ask for half an hour, and then get there an hour before the shoot starts. And so, they kind of look at me like, I don't know if I can ask for that. I'm like, then you'll get bad pictures. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, like your goal is to get the pictures, not to have them like you. I mean, one of the mistakes people often make is they so much focus on photographing their friends or their family that they end up getting kind of tepid pictures or like really weird, humiliating pictures of their moms. I'm sure you see a lot of those.
Yes, lots.
And so I think that, when you need your friends, you need your family, photograph near strangers. It's a lot easier.
Yeah, and you build a different skill set doing that.
A different skill set, and when you ask them to take their shirt off, you don't have to pay for it later.
Excellent point.
I'm talking of men, of course.
Of
not,
course.
No.
And the visuals running through my mind now are rather astounding of you with your near friends. But given that, in the course of your career, you said failure was part of what you do. How has failure become either a point of learning or a motivator? Because I think a lot of people view failure as maybe it's my time to get out. But how do you use failure on a set or on a shoot or in general?
Well, give me an example.
Well, you underexpose the film, or maybe the person you're working with isn't giving you what you want in return, or personal experience, I've had a conversation with an editor that didn't go well,
Sure.
and all of a sudden I'm not getting a call for a while.
Right.
I mean, those are moments of failure, or just run a bad set every once in a while.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's. I think that one of the questions you asked earlier was like, how was I able to be so confident early on? I think it's really important for young photographers to be really arrogant. It's
arrogant in what way?
Arrogant in the sense of like, I'm doing something special and unique. I've got something special to bring to the table, and the rest of them get it all wrong. And that's certainly how I felt when I was starting. I remember someone said to me a few years ago, it was a young photographer, and they said, I can't make the pictures yet, but my ideas for pictures are better than other people's. And they said, but as I keep shooting, my pictures will begin to look like my vision. And I was like, it was so interesting the way they even said it better than I'm saying it now, but that's kind of how I felt. I felt like when I was in Toronto and I was shooting and I was looking at who was successful in Toronto at the time, I felt like the pictures I want to make are so much better than the pictures you are making. And I wasn't making them yet. I was making kind of rough stabs at them, like you saw in my early work here, and they weren't really quite there yet. I didn't quite have bragging rights or anything, but I kind of felt like I was reacting against what they were doing. And I thought that was really helpful to me to try to carve out, like I would be thinking, that's a lame way to make portraits. I'm going to show you the way they should be made. And I think that kind of arrogance is so important because it gets you through those early years where you have a few supporters, but most people, certainly most people who would hire you, won't give you the time of day. You're invisible. And you're going to be invisible for about 10 years. If you're lucky, after about 12 years, people who you don't know immediately will actually know your name. And so for that 10 years, you need the arrogance to believe that what you're bringing to the table will one day be recognized and seen as, worthwhile or visionary or whatever your goal is or whatever. And so, yeah, I think that you use that. And I think the failure thing, let's face it, when you're starting out, you're humbled constantly. And so I think that you, in a way, like at that time when I was turning 30 and I was struggling through, like whether I should even stay in photography, part of the thing was that like I had put so much time in already, and I kind of was like, I might as well just be like a second tier, like half crappy, mediocre photographer, going forward. I might as well just do that rather than like try to transition my career into something else. I do think starting your shooting seriously early is really important. A lot of people get into assisting and they get tied into that or some other part of the business. And I think I kind of failed into being a photographer in the sense that I wasn't a big guy and I wasn't very technical in those days, so I couldn't be an assistant. So I failed as an assistant, so I became a photographer.
Well put. Were there editors or art directors who were central to your career, who kind of took you under their wing or gave you a leg up or recognized your work early on?
Absolutely, like especially in New York where I came and I just went around and saw people. And people were like, the first person I saw literally, his name was Hank Bordowitz. I remember his name. I haven't seen him like in 30 years or something. But I think he called the Village Voice and said, you got to see this guy. He made an appointment for me with Bob Newman. And that was I was like, I can't, he opened my portfolio. It was a picture of John Cale. The first one in UNEASY was the first picture of my portfolio. And he called over the other guy. He's like, hey, this guy's actually good. And he called him over. And I was like, wow, like I'm in New York where there's thousands of photographers and it's notable that I'm good. Like I thought it was very strange, And, that was sort of a moment where I realized, oh, I could actually do something here, But yeah, certainly like some early people like Bob Newman, who then went on to Guitar World, Edna Suarez at the Village Voice, then later at the New York Times, Alex Kahlo and William Neighbors at Fortune were the first people who really gave me jobs that actually paid money, and I could actually hire people to work with me. It was amazing. Michelle Romero at Entertainment Weekly gave me my first real features, where the first time I ever got like full page pictures in a real magazine. The faith of these people I don't forget. Bruce Ramsey at multiple magazines in Toronto and New York gave me amazing jobs and just sort of believed in me. He became a friend, and I was visiting New York one time and I was like, I don't know what to do. My lawyer literally said, if your last name isn't Avedon, I can't get you working papers. And I'm like, really? And Bruce said, you're really good. Just move here and you'll get work. And it was obviously like kind of a naive thing to say, but I took his advice and it worked.
Yeah. Kindness of strangers to a certain extent.
I'm sorry?
Kindness of strangers to a certain extent, and of course
it
your
was just
talent.
a thing
but-
where, I mean, it was kind of a stupid move. I probably shouldn't have done it, but I was, there's something about being young and naive and arrogant and stupid that is so powerful. And I'm serious. Like, you wouldn't take those kind of risks in your early 30s that you take in your mid 20s, just because you're in that space. And what's the worst that can happen? I'd be deported. Who cares? I had no obligations. I had no responsibilities. It'd be fine. It'd be like a good story.
Is it difficult to self-publish a book on that scale?
That's a great question. I mean, when the book physically arrived, I was shocked at how big it was. Like you just work on PDFs through the process. So, and they sent a sample book, but I was like, I'm sure this is exaggerated, and then it comes and it's huge, and I'm like, I was arrogant when I was young, but now I'm a little more modest, and I'm still Canadian, and I don't know. It was a little upsetting. I'm coming to terms with it now. It's okay. I mean, look, I couldn't send it back at that point, and what can I do? But yeah, I mean, I did. So to answer that question, I did self-publish in the end. I took the mock-up around and sent to a couple dozen publishers in the States and Europe, and got into a couple of serious conversations. I was talking with a publisher in Germany, and they wanted $32,000. So they wanted me to give them $32,000, and they'd publish my book, and they would give me $1,000 books to do what I want with, and then they would sell a couple thousand, and I would get no revenue from the sales. And that somehow rubbed me wrong. I don't know why. And I ran to the photographer Ron Haviv at a holiday party, and I'd never met him before, but we got chatting. I was actually telling him about Gentleman's Club, and I was prefacing by talking about Uneasy, and I was about to publish this book, and I mentioned I was working with this publisher in Germany, and he's like, why are you doing that? And I was like, well, what other ways to do it? He said, well, you should self-publish. And I was like, well, how's that going to work? He said, well, you do it with a design team, and then they find you the printer, and the printer, they kind of manage all that, and then you get the books and you sell them. And distribution is mostly done online now anyways. And I was like, that sounds great. Like, are you serious? He's like, yeah. So he gave me his card. I sent him an email the next day. And within a couple hours, he sent back the contact info for the designers. It's a design team called DEMO, D-E-M-O. So you can just look them up and tell them I sent you. And I sent them like a pitch email with a link to the website for the book. And they said yes. And they designed the book and did a incredible job. Working with a designer, as many of you would know, it just takes it to a whole other level. And I think they really made. I'm proud of the work, but I think they really made it into such a piece that is. I love photo books, and I think a photo book must be an object as well as a collection of work. And so many photo books I even own are not particularly interesting as books. And it was important to me to make a book that I could be proud of just as a thing. And I am very proud of it. And I feel like it really, it also works great as a weapon because it's quite big. Obviously, it's a very strange picture of George McGovern. George McGovern ran for president against Richard Nixon in 1972. It was kind of when I was growing up, was certain like an icon and a household name. And so when I was sent to photograph him, it was pretty awesome and exciting. And what happened was I was shooting him at a cottage rental his family had done in Virginia Beach. And he walked off the beach and greeted my assistant and I dressed like that. And he looked great and he shook my hand and he's a very confident man, and as he should be. And so we went in the house and he went in and showered and shaved and changed his clothes and looked, dressed properly for the shoot. It was for Newsweek. So we did the shoot, it went great. And at some point I turned to my assistant and I was like, oh my God, I so much want to shoot him like how he met him. And she's like, just ask him. This was before my days of just asking, I was just developing the just ask approach. And so I asked him and he's like, no. And I said, well, I won't give it to Newsweek. It'll be for my portfolio. And he's like, okay. And, along with saying like how great he looked and all that. And so as he got changed, my assistant and I hung the seamless in the kind of common area of the cottage and put up one light because I was still working on the lighting then. So I figured out to learn how to light it, because that terrible picture I showed you with the bad lighting, I learned that I had to start with one light. And if I could light with one light, then I could move to two lights. And so I lit him with one light, just an umbrella like right behind me and behind camera. And so he came out, and I think he thought we were going to shoot on the beach. And I was like, we're going to shoot right here. And he's like, okay. And so we shot it, and we shot about 3 rolls. And yeah, it was magic. Oh, he also wrote me he wrote me a letter for my green card, which I was very appreciative of. I mean, in a way, archiving negatives and transparencies and contact sheets and stuff is kind of easier in a way, like, because they're physical. For me, like initially, early on, I just would literally just write the date on the sleeve, and then at some point, it's very organic for me. As soon as I have too much stuff that I can't find anything, I create a system for it. So I think in '93, I created a system for my black and white negatives and contacts. And I literally, like, the first roll was 1, second roll was 2, second roll was 3. And I got up to around 5,000 and something by the time I finished, moved to full on to digital. And then when I started doing it with my color negatives, I just did it then I did it by year first, and that way it differentiated from the black and white in terms of the system. A couple of years ago, when I was really angry at that agent who stole all my money, I archived all my work, and it took me about 2 years to like go through everything and scan everything, and I tagged everything, and I have a very detailed archive now I can, call from to make pitch treatments and things like that for jobs, which is great. And just being able to find stuff easily is great. I mean, it's a thing. I mean, as soon as you have enough, you can't find things, it's a good time to do it. Yeah, I don't know if that's very helpful advice. I mean, I think you have to find a system that works for you. In terms of digital work, I've been just putting in things on drives, and then things that are my favorite shoots, I put on a second drive, which I call the greatest hits drive. I'm now going to actually take all the greatest hit stuff and put them on the cloud. So I have them in a third place. So when all those drives don't work anymore, I'll have somewhere else I can find the shoots. I don't know. I'm always trying to come up with new things to do. I mean, in a weird way, having just finished this book, it kind of wraps up my celebrity portrait work in a nice way that's made me feel some sense of closure. I mean, I still do that work, of course, but there's a way in which a lot of the things I was aiming towards with that work have had some kind of found a nice home. So I'm very open about new things. Actually, unfortunately, I had a meeting with my agent a couple weeks ago, and they floated by like a half dozen major projects they want me to work on, and I said yes to everything because I was so open, which I'm now trying to kind of roll back a bit. She's nodding her head. I certainly work with my agent. I mean, that's as much as I'm very much an independent and kind of an openly contrarian person. I love having an agent. I mean, I love working with clients. I love that there's a way in which, as a freelancer, I'm independent. I can carve my own road, and that's kind of mixing metaphors, but I can cut my own path. Let's say that. And then, but working with an agent, working with clients, I'm able to genuinely collaborate on projects as well, and I love that as well. I like that I can kind of have both. Working with an agent is so great for that. I mean, for personal projects, they're definitely driven by my own instincts of, I don't know, personal projects are largely driven by, I've got projects I can do, they'll probably take me 3 to 5 years to finish. So it has to be a project that, even if it fails on any kind of success commercial radar, I'm still be glad I did it. I think that's kind of a big way to do it. I mean, coming up with ideas that are worth shooting for 5 years is very difficult. And it's been a big part of my development as a photographer to figure out ways to do that. Certainly one practical tip I'll give you, and it sounds really obvious, but if you have a good idea, write it down. I know it sounds obvious, but people just don't think to do that. They just think, I'll think of it later. I literally will pick up my phone and I'll email myself. And the subject line is idea. and I'll email it to myself just before I forget it. And I do that for videos. I'll have ideas for videos or ideas for pictures or a whole series or whatever, and I'll just email it to myself, and then I'll put it on a list later. But yeah, I mean, I think, certainly, especially when you get out of school, I meet a lot of young people who get out of school, and there's something about the environment of school, having an audience or having a community gives them, it just feeds so much and helps them bloom creatively, and they get away from that. It gets very difficult. I think New York is a very difficult environment for a young artist. I describe New York as a marketplace, and it's almost better to kind of nurture your art and your project or whatever outside New York and then bring it to market. I think as much as people I think are very helpful and open here, everyone's busy running their businesses. Everyone's busy doing their thing. And until you're ready to bring to market, I think it's a hard place to find a creative community. And if I'm wrong here, maybe I'd love to be corrected, but that's the experience I've had and I've had talking to young people, is that they find it hard to have an ongoing creative community here. So I don't think wherever you can find it, wherever you can find inspiration and people to help you get your ideas to blossom, you should definitely tap into. And I think it's important to be a doer. I mean, one of the big differences I see with people is lots of people have ideas, few people do them. And part of doing it is just picking up the phone and asking for help or asking, will you do this? I mean, when I published my first book, it took me back to my earliest days of being a photographer, where I had to cold call people because I had to get a publisher and I had to get a gallery to do an exhibition. I was cold calling anyone I knew had anything to do with the art world or the gallery world. I wish I'd known you then, Thomas. And I just was just like, will you help me? And, you know, people, sometimes they could help me, sometimes they couldn't, but just asking for help for a particular shoot or ideas, or will you meet me for lunch and brainstorm with me? Just ask and do. It is a crucial difference between people who achieve success and people who don't. A lot of it is just doing it. Oh, and the second thing I advise on that is put your weirdest things that you don't want people to know about yourself into your pictures, and your work will be interesting.
And speaking of asking, permissions. Did you have to ask everybody in the book to get their permission?
That's a great question. I think in the whole book, I might have got permission from 5 people. The book has 338 portraits. The cover, you have to get permission. In this, the laws in this country are very generous to photographers, largely because of groups like ASMP and people before them who have helped make copyright law be consistent with free speech laws. And yeah, the fact is that if I asked for model releases for these shoots, mostly I wouldn't be able to get them for most of them. I mean, you see the kind of pictures I show, they would not be approved by publicists.
Right.
And it's not like I get blowback or anything, but there's a way in which publicists want they want the picture that is flattering and will offend no one. Mm-hmm. And I want the picture that will be exciting to the most people or whatever, exciting to me. And those aren't ones that publicists generally like. I mean, I work to get on with publicists, but ultimately I choose the pictures I want. In a few cases, I had been in situations where publicists insisted I sign a release without any changes, and that's why I had to get permission.
Okay.
Early on, I remember handing in a shoot actually to Bruce Ramsey, and he gave me an assignment, and I put hundreds of 35 millimeter transparencies on his desk, and he was like, he just looked at me like, what are you doing? Like, he's like, you do an edit. You know, show me a selection of a range of them. Give me 20. And yeah, I learned so much from Bruce. The first time I met him, actually, I'll just regress a little bit. I was at school, and his magazine was literally next door to the college. So I made an appointment. I called. I made an appointment. Went in to see him. I went in there with literally a pile of prints of all different sizes. And he looks through a couple, and he's like, there's this thing, it's called a portfolio. And you make your pictures all the same size. And they all go in the book. It's really cool. And anyway, so when I hand in my work, for commercial work, I give them everything. If they ask me for like selects of my favorites, I'll send a list or like a folder or whatever of my favorites. because they're paying big money and they get everything. They can have whatever they want. When I do editorial, they don't pay well enough for that, so I give them an edit, and I give between, I don't know, 8 and 25 frames, depending on how much I shoot. One of my tricks is I'll shoot multiple setups, and then I give less, like just a few frames of each. But because I've given so many setups and it looks robust, I call it the illusion of choice. So they think they have lots of choices, but because there's only a few frames of each, they have to cull from what I want. But yeah, I try to give as tight an edit as I can. My basic rule is never give a shot that I'll be frustrated that runs. So when your shot runs that you don't like or you're embarrassed by, you have only yourself to blame because you shouldn't hand it in. And I mean, I remember one time someone told me that Dan Winters only hands in 1 frame, and I was like, how can that be? Like, it's insane. But yeah, I hand in, you know, like a half dozen to, generally I do about 12 to 15 frames for every editorial shoot. If it's a cover, I give a lot more, but for most editorial, I just give that's what I give. And if they come back and ask for more frames of a particular setup, I'm happy to give them more, but I don't assume that they want more. Usually they come back asking for more of a setup I wouldn't imagine. So I like to give less. Most successful people are risk takers. And when I want to do my stupid, crazy idea, there's a good chance they'll say yes, because they didn't get to where they are by making the safe choices. Even business people who you might think of as being boring or whatever, they got to where they are by taking risks and being bold. And also again, even if they're in politics or business or some kind of field like that, they're creative people. They think in creative ways. So oftentimes I feel like if I can get to them, I can get an interesting idea or two pushed through. My current favorite groups are like, I like the Arctic Monkeys, I like LCD Sound System, Okkervil River, I don't know. Who else do I listen to, Michelle? Yes. Fiery Furnaces. I don't listen to music while I photograph. I'm too hard to hear. I don't know, I feel I'm subtly controlling of shoots, and so playing loud music, I don't know, it takes the narrative away from me. I don't know, I do think my shoots, I mentioned that with that Paul Frank picture. I'm trying to create an environment where when I ask you to do something, you're docile enough that you'll say yes. And so I think playing music distracts from that. Also, like, I mean, I might play music, but eventually it usually comes down because they can't hear me. And so we turn the music down, yeah. My success rate comes from, with shooting personalities, comes from a combination of 2 things, being prepared and being interested. If I'm not interested, I'm much less likely to get that picture that you see, that you can see I'm interested, you can see I'm engaged. You know, one of my big influences, of course, was Irving Penn, which I was obsessed with him. One of the things I really loved about his best pictures were really weird, but they're weird in a way that you knew he really was interested in this person and respected them. His pictures of like Yves Lenoir or Christian Dior, his Christian Dior picture is my favorite picture. It's really like strange and awkward, and you can tell like he loves Christian Dior and his designs and his whole brand. Like he's all about that stuff because he's a fashion photographer too. So, you know, he was friends with many of these people, and it's what he did. But he made these strange pictures of these people, and you could tell like he was going deep with them. He wanted to make the coolest, weirdest picture he could make of them, and that said, this person's interesting, you should know about them. And in a way, like a lot of the edit of my book is based on, like a lot of the people, if you look through my book, you may not know a third of the people because like I'm showing people who I think are cool, niche kind of people in their fields, and I think they're cool, so I think I want you to see that I'm interested and I want to get you interested. I really want to photograph Richard Nixon, and I never really wrote to him or tried to reach him. I don't really know why. I don't know. I did write to Frank Sinatra, and eventually got a response from his PR team. the shot I wanted to do of him, now I'll admit it was a pretty stupid idea, but I wanted to do a shot of him where he's naked. Okay, just stick with me here. He's naked and he's bending over, looking through. And it's titled "Old Blue Eyes is Back."
Yes.
So basically, when I made the transition to digital, I decided to go all in and I shoot all digital now. So personal projects, assignments, whatever. I mean, all my clients want digital. So it really was a question of whether I do anything on film for me personally. And I think, in a way, it was a good thing because once I committed to digital, I had to commit to digital in a way that I could fully embrace it and be comfortable and excited about how it rendered visually. And the difference was moving to medium format digital because the difference was that the way the tones flowed was much better and less sort of blocky than the DSLR cameras, which I felt digital in some way, in a way, whereas the medium I shoot a Hasselblad with a H4X body and a P65 back, and it just renders, when it's exposed properly, it renders really beautifully, and it prints really well, prints big, it renders beautifully in magazines. Any use I want, it looks great. I do video now, and traditionally I was really more interested in documentary. I love documentary films. The cinema verite period of documentary is like one of my favorite things to like learn about and follow, and I've photographed a lot of those directors and interviewed them, so I kind of went deep with it at one point. I made a couple documentaries, but as video and motion materials become part of the landscape that I'm working in, I've been trying to make more videos that kind of connect to what I really am known for and do. And so I've done a few commercials and short form videos for editorial or commercials for like online use. I did a commercials for Oscar Mayer and also for Viagra, and it was like super fun to do. But one thing I really made a choice in like early on was to not do the camera work myself. I chose, even though obviously I've got a good eye and all that, I'd rather hire a DP who shoots, motion projects multiple times a week, every week, and have their expertise, and then I can step back and be the director. And that's really the role I take when I do motion projects now, is I bring in a small team who do motion and do camera work and do sound, and I step back and I drive the vision behind it. And that's how I like to do it. And that work is very difficult and challenging, but as I said earlier, I love doing challenging technical projects are kind of like my favorite thing to do now. So whenever a video project comes up, whether it's with magazines or advertising, I go in, I jump in and with excitement and just embrace it. It's like my favorite thing to do now.